everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are going to be working on making a mug today. You've been given clay. Right now it's probably in a ball, but we want to flatten it so it is a little easier to roll out with a rolling pin. So I'm just pressing it in onto my board or whatever work table you have set up. You can flip it as you go. So it's a little flatter this way. It's easier when we roll it out. So a mug is basically the basis of a rectangle. Mug height, comfortably, they're about 4 to 6 inches tall. And I think you should kind of gauge how big you want your mug. An average one would be 5 inches. If you want something tea-size, do 4. And if you want something really, really tall, you're going to want to go to 6 inches. So just keeping that in mind, we want it 6 inches tall and about 10 to 12 inches long. That way we have extra clay to work with, and you can cut it down as you'd like once you get to your form. To roll everything out, we want the clay to be about the thickness of our pinky finger. As you're going, kind of rotate and readjust where the clay is, and that's going to give you a really even roll. I'm flipping it every once in a while, even turning it in other directions. You're more than welcome to stand to do this. I find it's more helpful to stand. And the reason we're flipping it as we go, it is to make the clay even, but it's also to help make sure that the clay does not get stuck to the table. Once whatever you're rolling on gets oversaturated with water, the clay ends up sticking. We're getting there. Pretty close to where we want to be. I'm using a measuring tape, but you can also use a ruler. So this is a needle tool. You can use really any mark making tool, even a pencil, because we're just going to first draw in our proportions. So I'm going to measure 12 inches to start. Again, I'm only drawing the line as reference, and I'll cut it later. I'm thinking 5 inches is going to be a height that I go for. Perfect. And here you can see we have our rectangle drawn. I'm going to cut it. You can cut it with a number of tools. You can use some of these that we might have provided. This is a fettling knife and this is a needle tool. But you're also welcome to use a kitchen knife or even an X-Acto. Cut out my form. I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to bunch it up into a ball of clay. We're going to use the rest of this later on, so we want to make sure it stays nice and wet. I would recommend putting it in a plastic bag. Now, we're going to use this piece of foam that we gave you. This is going to be our form, so it's going to help the clay stand up. It's going to allow us support as we decorate our cup. I'm going to put this down. We're going to stand this up. And we're going to work on wrapping this around our form. We have excess clay, which is great. This allows us to line it up exactly how we want. So I'm going to take the needle tool and I'm going to cut just a little bit outside the perfect meeting point. That way we have extra clay. So I'm going to cut right around here. It's better to have too much clay than too little because you can always cut it off. Alright, this is what it looks like. What we are going to do is start to press these together. We're going to go the whole way down. You don't have to press too hard. We're not smearing yet. You can still see this line. We're going to take one of our sharper tools, any of our cutting tools, and this is called scratching and scoring. It's almost like making sutures in your pot. And that's basically, it's giving teeth to the clay and mixing the two together so that they lock in with each other. And this will help your cup be sturdier and we won't have any surprises. Sometimes in the kiln, the cups do like to come apart if they're not constructed properly. So we're smoothing that all together. We're also going to do the same thing in the top. We're going to smooth the top. Later, when we're about done with this, we are going to pull this out and we'll be able to smooth the inside as well. But right now, we're just making sure the top and the bottom fit together really nicely. So you can see it's a bit rough. It needs more smoothing. You can either use your finger, we have sponges, and we have a rib. Feel free to try all of these techniques. It's whatever feels more comfortable to you. We're really just wiping it, and that's going to help smooth everything and also make it stronger. So I have smoothed this down quite a bit, but I'm going to use a little bit of water. So I wet my sponge and I wrung it all the way out so there's no water, excess water in here. The idea is that you don't want to make your clay too wet while you're building with it because it actually absorbs all of the clay and it'll turn into mud pretty quickly. So you have to be easy on the water, but it's also really helpful to have water just to smooth the whole piece. That way we can avoid some of these cracks that are happening. All right, this has been smoothed. You can kind of see the thickness of it. What we have to do now is make the bottom. So we're going to grab our clay from before. We want to squish this into a ball if you haven't already. And we're going to flatten it just like we did in the beginning because we're going to use the rolling pin again. We're not going for a specific size or shape. So you can just rotate it and roll it out until it's the same thickness of your pinky finger. All right. This is going to be the bottom of our cup. So we're going to pick this up. We're going to put it right on down. And we're going to use one of our cutting tools and cut all the way around. We're going to set this aside because we're going to keep using this. Great. So we have our bottom on, but it's not fully attached. What we want to do is use our needle tool again, and we're going to score just like we did to attach the sides together, all the way around. We're going to use our finger to then smooth all of that. And again, we are going to smooth the inside too in the future. So we can't forget that, but we don't have to do it quite yet. Here we go. We can use our rib and our other smoothing tools. Make it nice and smooth again. Really clean everything up. If you've knocked anything in your process of adding this, you can go back and clean the rest of the pot up. Grab my sponge again. So this is the really last step before we start to decorate. We will attach a handle, but I like to attach the handle after we've had some time to add some texture and detail. But keep it in mind that there is going to be one side of the pot that's going to have a handle. So if you want, you can leave it blank, or you can texture it, but just know the handle might cover up some of the details. Now is your time to start texturing it. We've given you some texture tools, but you can use so many objects around the house, and we've provided a PDF of ideas. I've got some lace right here. I think this leaves a really, really fun texture. So I'm going to use the lace and show you how to impress lace. But you can do this with anything. Seashells are really great. Got lots of, I'm sure, kids' toys that leave fun impressions. So I'm wrapping the lace kind of gently around it. I'm going to start at one end, and I'm going to press this in with my finger. So you want to press it in firmly, but you want to make sure that it doesn't get lost in the clay. So you can see it's pressed down as compared to this, but it's not so much that it's getting buried in the clay. So you want to go the whole way around. And what's really great is actually there's this space where they meet. I might add my handle right here, rather than worry about making sure they touch. Make sure you're going all the way around. This has been pressed pretty well into the clay, but I also might roll it just gently on the board. Make sure I didn't miss any spots. Alright, this is the fun part. We're going to peel it gently, go nice and slow. Isn't that a neat texture? And you can see the two areas where they meet. You're welcome to continue decorating. You can press tons of more objects, you can carve, you can draw. So please have fun and play with it. This is when you can really get creative. I'm going to move on to the next step though. We are going to make our handle. And remember, this is your mug, so if you don't want a handle, that is absolutely fine. But I just want to show you guys how, just in case. So I'm going to grab some of that clay that we have left over. I'm just going to rolling it into a ball, kind of flattening it so that we get some of this texture out of it. Great. So what we are going to do is use the rolling pin and roll it out. But this you want to roll a little bit thicker because you want the handle to be a nice size in your hand. So I would say maybe instead of the width of your pinky finger, maybe like your pointer, your middle finger, just a little bit thicker, but not so thick that it's going to feel chunky in your hand. I've got this rolled out. It's a little on the thick side. I am now going to cut a really long rectangle out, and you can decide the width. All right. got. Mine's a little on the thick side. It's definitely on the thicker side of my finger, but I think it'll be nice. I'm gonna do, if you're thinking about it, we don't want these sharp edges that we just cut out to end up hurting our hands. So you want to take your sponge and you want to just gently smooth it. That way it's comfortable to use in the future. You can even use your finger to smooth it into a rounder shape. And you want to do the same thing for the inside. And as a fun tip, you actually want to thin out the bottom. So the lower part of your handle, you have the smaller part of your hand. So I'm really just smoothing it, and in smoothing it, I'm stretching it and making it thinner. So you can see that it's tapering. All right, now the fun part. So we want to turn it into a question mark. How about that? And we're going to set that down. And we're going to let it sit for a little bit. We want to find where we want to put it. So I'm putting it right in between the border of my texture. This is where we want a little bit of water. And we want to just dab right where we want to put the top of the handle. I recommend doing it maybe a ½ inch under the lip. And we're going to score in like a tic-tac-toe kind of pattern, as you can see. And so it's not at the top of the mug, but it's just a little bit below. We're going to take our question mark, and so this is the point that's going to touch the pot. So we want to get some water on it, and we're going to score that in the same tic-tac-toe pattern. We're not going to deal with the bottom yet. We're going to figure that out when we start to attach it. So I'm going to attach the handle to the mug now. And I'm putting some pressure right here to push those teeth together. We want to take our scorer again, and we want to score all the parts that the handle connects to the mug. Handles are really, really delicate, and that's actually what breaks off first when it comes to these. So you want to make sure you score really, really well and you smooth the pieces together. That way we know that your piece will make it safe and sound back home to you. So I'm going to use the sponge and really smooth this. Really take your time with this. And know once you attach your handle, you can also decorate it. All parts of this mug are totally customizable and able to be decorated. So now we need to attach the bottom. You can decide how big you want it. If you want your handle to be larger, tinier, depends on the size of your hand, how big your mug is. So what we're going to do is just find where this rests. I'm going to score it. Add a little bit of water to both sides. So I've scored the mug right here. I'm going to score the handle, and the two meet together just like before. And you're doing the same thing. You are going to scratch and score the attachment. That way we know it's going to be nice and sturdy. We can use our tool also to smooth the inside for all those creases that we can't fit our hands. And just readdress the top of your handle. It might have gotten bumped in the process of adding the bottom. And if it has, just smooth it out with your fingers. Then I'm going to come in and do the final touches with the sponge. This is what my mug looks like. It's pretty smooth. You can't see any seams. Before we get to the fun part, which is painting, we have to take this form out and we have to smooth our inside. So this comes right out. Pretty fun. We're going to set it aside. And here you can see our seam, and you can still see the seam on the bottom too. What we're going to do is we're going to take some of our tools. We're going to scratch and score, just as we did. Go as far down as you can. It is harder with bigger hands, so if you have a friend with smaller hands, see if they can help you. But I'll give you some tips so that you can also get tools down in there to do the same job as you. So you can see I scored. I'm going to see how far my hand will fit. And you literally just pull your finger up the side of that seam. Be nice and delicate. You can take your time, make sure it's nice and smooth. So you can see I've gotten this pretty good, but I still have some seam down there. I like to take the back of the tools, and I'm going to use that instead as my finger and just run the tool up and down it. It actually worked really well. Look at that. We still have the bottom seam to deal with, so we want to score the bottom the best that we can. Again, we've got a really good attachment on the outside, so it's not the end of the world if you feel like you're not doing a good enough job. This is just an extra layer of protection. Alright. I've scored the bottom, as you can see. I'm going to try the back of this tool because this is a tighter space and much more delicate. And again, I'm just running the tool along the outside of it. I'm only halfway, so I wanted to show you the difference. Alright, this is what this looks like. I'm going to try and use a sponge just to clean the top and as much of the inside as I can. This cup will also get glaze on the inside. You're welcome to paint it with a colored glaze, but if you don't, we'll be painting it with a clear glaze. And that will also help smooth out some of the imperfections that have happened while you've been scoring. So I just put my hand in here and I've got a sponge and I'm just twirling it, hoping that the sponge will do some of the work for me. There, you can see the inside. There's still a few marks. This might be a good time to try a paintbrush to see if that will help smooth the inside a little bit better. So I've got a paintbrush and I wet it a little bit. We're just going to get rid of some excess water. And I'm actually going to run that along the bottom seam to see if that helps hide some of the marks I made. Yeah, I think it worked pretty well. Look at that. Awesome. One last thing before we start painting. I want you to take either a needle tool or a pencil And I want you to flip your cup over and write your name on the bottom. Last name is really helpful. This will help us identify it when we're putting it in the kiln and when we're contacting you for pickup. All right, it's time to paint. We've provided the primary colors to you, and we've broken down how to mix them. So I think I want to do an ombre effect. And I'm going to start probably at blue at the bottom. I'd like to use kind of like a fluffier, thicker brush versus a thin one. I feel like it holds more paint. You're going to get less streaks that way. It's good to have 1 to 2 coats. The thicker the brush is, the more likely you only have to do 1 coat. Basically, however this paint goes on, that's how it's going to look when it's fired. So if it looks streaky or globby, it's going to fire that way. So definitely take your time, try out a bunch of brushes. We provided you quite a number of them, and see what fits best. If you don't like it, you can always wipe it away with a sponge. I always recommend to paint pretty delicately. As you're painting, you might realize you're starting to lose visibility of your pattern and your texture. That's okay. It will appear when it's done and it's fired. But you do want to make sure you don't press so hard that you can tell that you're smearing your pattern. So you can see there's still aspects of the pattern in there. It's just covered with a little bit of a layer of paint, but it will fire visibly. As I've been applying the paint, I think I'm only going to have to do 1 layer because it's gone on really thick. You can only see the pattern, but you can't see streaks of the paint. So I think that that's all I really need. All right. So you can see that I've ombre'd this. You can still see my pattern in here, so that's going to come through after the firing, which is really exciting. I chose not to paint the inside. I just want it to be white, so when it gets fired, it'll have a clear glaze in it and it'll turn just a nice basic white color. So if you feel like you don't want to paint the inside, that's absolutely fine. I recommend putting these in a small box when you come to bring them back. Make sure they're not entirely dry. It's really good for them to just feel kind of cool to the touch. Clay is actually much stronger when it still has a little bit of moisture in it, and that will basically help it get to the studio safe and sound so that we can fire it. It's been really great making these mugs with you, and thank you for joining us. I'm excited to see what you guys end up making.